Succession means that we're passing some entity from one generation to another. In the first 5 segments there, we've talked about the principles, really the heart matters and the foundations. And basically it can be summed up like this. It's passing the ministry responsibility from an apostolic father to apostolic sons or son. So it's of utmost importance that we really understand the whole principles behind the longevity, the faithfulness, the commitment. So let's begin with a beautiful or perfect model of succeeding the ministry from one generation to another generation. And so if we can clarify what that looks like, then we kind of make our decisions around that. Now, it's really hard to say, okay, you need to just do this and it'll work because, man, oh man, none of us really have that much experience in it. And we've learned a lot from watching other guys, but we don't really have a manual to go by. Other than getting, like I say, the foundations of faith right, understanding what succession is. Because again, there's a huge difference between succession and replacement. And a lot of times we see replacement and people call it succession just because they want it to sound good, but it's not, it's just replacement. So replacement is positional. It means I take my position and giving it to the next guy. So maybe I'm the pastor and now he's the pastor, right? The senior pastor, and now he's the senior pastor. Maybe I'm the chairman and now this guy's going to be the chairman. In companies, I'm the CEO and now this guy's going to be the CEO. And that really isn't succession, because succession is the carrying on of something, not the replacing of something. And so in succession, we're looking for the vision, the mandate, the culture, the passion of the ministry, the purpose of the ministry to carry on from one generation to another generation. In replacement, you're going to get another guy with new ideas that's going to do things his way. Okay, now both of them involve change, demand change, require change, and they will change just by the nature of the beast. So when we're talking about succession, we're talking about passing on the vision rather than the position. So if we're passing on the vision, then the next generation doesn't have to look anything like the last generation logistically. In Thailand, we've passed it on to like a round table. The idea of a round table, okay, an apostolic father passing on the succession of the ministry to a group of guys now, because you've got a group of guys that you've built and you've fathered them. And again, because they're brothers and sisters, this will work. But it's still not a real round table in the sense that it does have a point leader. So in Thailand, for example, the point leader would be Sawang. And the reason we call it a round table is because when we went to do that, I said, like, Sawang, I see you as the leader. All the other guys are like, yes, we see you as the leader. Now, let me say, the reason that everybody saw Sawang as the leader is because they saw him as the natural leader. He was the guy that was phoning all the churches, seeing how everybody's doing, putting together the conference, getting everybody together, making sure that the overall Victory Churches of Thailand was functioning and flourishing. If it wasn't a vote or a consensus or trying to figure out who's the best guy or the smartest guy to do this, any of our guys could do it, but Sawang was doing it. So you see that that's something that God's put in his heart. And so there is that point leader, and then of course Sawang says, no, I don't want to be called the point leader, because he sees himself, well, in some cases, as the younger brother, right? So it doesn't matter, because we're leading through vision, not through position. That comes back to one of the 10 tenets of victory, that we work through relationship, not through control. See, position is control. Vision works through relationship. There's a pastor that I know who was pastoring a fairly big church, and he probably had about 5 other associates on his staff as pastors. And when he felt it was time for him to move on, and he was moving into a greater area of ministry, that part was all good. But he did kind of what we did, only without the same relationship among the next generation. They didn't see themselves as brothers and sisters. They saw themselves positionally as who's going to take this thing, who's going to be the next senior pastor. The church came through such a struggle as everybody kind of sorted their place out, and of course you end up with everybody leaving except one, and then that one by default becomes the senior pastor. So again, you need to ensure that you have those relationships built in the next level of leadership. Okay, so in Thailand I can say there hasn't been one quibble or squabble. In fact, anybody that ever felt even a bit jealous of the other one would be so embarrassed. Because that's just not where we are, right? We work together through relationship, and a relationship is covenant relationship where I'm doing whatever I'm doing for your best benefit, right? So there's a lot of models of succession out there. One thing that we noticed in the northern hills of Thailand, in the jungles, so you've got missionaries that came in and planted churches. And so what they did, and this was years ago, to turn over the responsibility of the churches to the nationals as leaders, is they put a board of directors in place, and that was all done by democratic vote. And then the pastor is installed or removed by this board. And oftentimes it's every year. You get a new pastor every year. The board decides who this new pastor is going to be, usually after we decided why we don't like the old pastor. And sometimes just, well, somebody else needs a turn. That's not the way pastoring works. It's not the way the ministry works. It does bring protection. In other words, those churches are still there decades and decades and decades later, but they're dead and they're political. So if you're a young man or a woman in one of those churches and you're called of God to do something, you've pretty all got to rise up out of the middle of all that and begin to build something on your own, because you can't wait for these guys to give you a position and think that that's going to work. So that kind of safety, right? The safety of installing a democracy will actually kill the vision. I mentioned the time that we approached the denomination to go to Thailand as missionaries, and they said, no, you don't even qualify. Don't even think about it. And that's because democracy or any other form of government, right, of control, will kill the vision. There's not room for both. And that was a big part of the issue with the Assemblies of God churches in Australia, that Hillsongs came out of, and a lot of those big churches came out of, was that they had become such a political organization that they could not move into a vision. They couldn't plant big churches. They couldn't grow until they got rid of the executive. So think of it like this. When you move from a single apostolic pioneer father model of ministry into a plurality now of leaders, right? It's growing. So there's a lot of leaders, a lot more people involved. I mean, in the beginning, we didn't have anybody. There wasn't anybody but us. But now we've got a lot of pastors and a lot of leaders that are all carrying responsibility. They're developed, they're excited, they're full of vision and full of faith. And so you want to have a new model that releases that and doesn't hinder it and doesn't control it, and doesn't put it underneath your idea of the way you think that things should go ahead. Okay? Maintain the vision, maintain the passion, maintain the culture. In fact, keep building those things, because that's key, that's foundational to moving ahead in the right direction. But the strategies and the organizational structure, be very careful. You keep those things loose, you keep them flexible, and you keep them so they do not interfere or overshadow the vision and the culture and the things that are in the hearts of the young leaders. One of my big goals is to release the new generation into a liberty and a freedom to move the ministry ahead more than what we had back in the day. It could be so much better.